honored, I know my dad would be honored that you came today. Not to be sad, but to be joyful. As you can see, a lot of us are wearing yellow because he liked yellow. And we don't see this as the end of something. We are so happy for how these last months and years turned out, the time we were able to have with him, all of us. It's been amazing. And as the time grew near for today, I wanted to make time to reflect and to understand the emotions that I was feeling from my dad passing. Initially, I wanted to tell a story about him, who he was. He's a very unique guy. Andrew Stuart Foster, with dates and a timeline. How he came to the U.S. from Jamaica, his family in Jamaica, and how he embraced this dream that is America, while not forgetting where he was from. And it was a beautiful story that I had in my mind, and you would have all loved it, but I'm not going to tell you now. I drove out west to Colorado, and I thought I had processed most of my grief as he was dying, but I hadn't really begun to get into it. My father, Andy, and I had a wonderfully complex and yet very, very simple relationship. I loved him fully, and he loved me fully. I told stories for years about he would just wake up and inform me that I would be doing something that day, with little or no buy-in on my part. And one of those times, he signed me up for a sprint triathlon. I had never done a triathlon before. I knew how to swim, I thought. I knew I could run. I knew how to ride a bike. And he decided, how hard could it be? And I would tell that story with a specific tone. He just signed me up. Stu can do it, let's go, so we're not late. And I would say it as if it was something I had to endure. And while I was taking the time this last week, the week before, I realized it wasn't about enduring anything. It was, look at how much faith that my dad had in me. He knew I could do it, even though I did not. To train, a bicycle with all the gears, that was completely unnecessary. To swim, I was amazed at how poorly I did in that part. By the end of the day, I came in the top third of the race. And what I realized is that he taught me that I could do anything. He had so much confidence in me. He had confidence in his wife, unwavering. His children, David, Sarah, Fanny, and my wife, Heather, and Fanny's husband, Logan, and Cam, probably more than David, to be honest. In my children, Andrew, Priscilla, Lily, Felicity, Trinity, and our granddaughter, Ivy. He believed in his brothers, Rocky, Mark, Mark's son, Greg, and his sister, Deb, and her husband, Richard, and everybody in this room. He knew that you could do it. The way that he would talk about Mom's mother and father, Ted and Tish, I call him Papa. There was never any doubt. He knew that all of you could do anything that you set your minds to through the grace of God, perfected in Jesus Christ. Period. The funny part that I think a lot of us didn't understand is that he was nervous about himself. And I think that was the hardest thing for me, is that he had so much confidence in me, but he was uncomfortable at times in himself. He could do physical things, but there were other things that he kept to himself. He loved to sing. He was good at it. He was a natural leader, but he did not like attention in the workplace. He was an artist. He kept it quiet. We literally just came across a whole sheaf of art that he had done in high school that none of us knew. And it's beautiful. We used to read Louis L'Amour a lot as a family. We would talk about the Sacketts. He loved to talk about those stories. And what I'm realizing more and more is that what Dad loved about those was that they loved each other. And that when one of them called, the others would come. And if I say nothing else today, or if you hear nothing else, it's this. He loved each of you. The ones that he hasn't seen in years. One of his college roommates is here. He loved each of you. He would take us to Colorado so often that he even bought a little place out there. I used to say we, but I didn't really pay any money for it. He did it. And we did a lot of camping, which was hilarious because he didn't like to camp. He didn't know how to camp. He was a terrible camper. Mom would set up the tent, take it down, cook, everything. But he liked to be out there. And it wasn't because he liked to be uncomfortable, but he liked to pare everything back so that it was just us. And he could enjoy us, to be fully present with him. And so, upon a lot of reflection, what I want to say is, thank you, Dad. The emotion that I feel, more than any other, is gratitude. And when I realized that, I kind of made a video about it. I sent it to my mom, and I was a crying mess. My face was puffy, and I was overcome with emotion. I'm so thankful for how much he invested into myself, into my family, and how he showed me how amazing it is to just sit back and to appreciate all of the beautiful people that God has made in this amazing earth that he created for us. From when Andy was a young man, when he was a boy, is how we would say it. But when he was a young man, he heard God's voice tell him, "You will marry Deborah White's." Right there. He never wavered. He married her. He never had eyes for another. He never dated anybody else. But even with this being the case, they had highs and they had some bad lows. But one thing they knew together is that Jesus is the risen Son of God. And through belief in him, you will have eternal salvation. There is nothing else that mattered more to my Father. As part of this reflection time, I hiked one of the first 14ers that we did in Colorado, a mountain called Humboldt. Dad was in his late 30s when he did it. I was 15, and David was about 10. I got up early, and I tackled that mountain with vim and vigor. To be fair, about halfway up, I misplaced both my vim and my vigor and wondered what in the world I was doing up there. It was very hard. And I had to laugh when I thought about this guy from Jamaica who couldn't handle a winter in Atlanta, coming out to Colorado and hiking a 14,000-foot mountain. He would start off at the bottom with a heavy parka and a vest and long trousers with long underpants, and he would carry them up the mountain and down because he was scared he'd get cold. I don't understand what it took mentally for him to do what he did. I was raised doing. He was not. And as I got to the top of the mountain, the trail got harder to follow. And it got to a place where you don't need ropes, but it's very sheer and very exposed. And I became very uncomfortable. And it just was so intense an emotion. We had no idea what we were doing. But in history, that's kind of what happens. Unprepared people do things. And this is how my dad saw it. We were here, and we just needed to do it. All the way to the top. The guy who took us to Colorado did not actually make it to the top, but we did. And when we got to the top, we loved it. And we ended up doing another almost 15 of these things over the years. Another thing that happened, my dad, another story I'd like to tell you is, one time I was doing some work in Jamaica. And my dad said, you should meet my friend, Brian Crichton. And I didn't know who Brian Crichton was. And I didn't really want to meet him. And out of obedience to my dad, I went and I met Brian. And he was one of the first friends of my father. He sent a letter when he heard what happened. And I'd like to read it to you quickly. Dear Debbie and family, heard from you recently of Andy's passing. Our thoughts have been constantly of you and the family. It is said that when someone important to us passes, they take a lot with them. I believe this. In Andy's case, he is one of the last connections to our past, the old Jamaica, of our fathers and grandfathers, in many ways, a better Jamaica. In that way, Andy is another link, gone. He is missed. From my own experience, I can tell you that with time, you will only miss him more. We miss the physical presence because we are human and love the person. We will always miss his presence. We must take comfort in the fact that in our side he has taken on invisibility, I know. As sure as day follows night, that love conquers death. Andy, moved into eternal love, has gone from a goodbye to a here he comes. Because so many who love him wait to bring him in. Andy Foster was one of my first childhood friends, if not the first. We go back a long time. I knew his dad, Uncle Stuart, fine man, good friend of my father. I remember his grandfather, Stanley, a fearsome fellow, as the old boys were to us kids then. So you see, I am one of those last links also. Andy and I lost touch for many years, as our respective lives took us on different paths, and they were very different, let me tell you. But our beginnings were never forgotten. Fortunately, we were able to reconnect, and I'm grateful for the time we were able to spend together. We were able to share memories, drives, meals, laughter, all the things that old friends do. To his beloved family, I say that he has only exchanged an old broken vehicle for a new one. He now has perfect movement, no pain, and is with you, close to you forever. Talk to him anytime, he hears always. To my old friend, I say, so long, safe travels, see you later. Now when Brian and I met, it was interesting, because Brian knows stories about my dad that I don't know, and he wasn't there, so I got to hear all kind of things. The first bike that Brian rode was the mini bike that we still have. They did slot cars together. They loved automobiles and racing. And one of the things that's been so amazing since we moved back, and I got the chance to basically hang out with my dad for the last year and a half, was last September, David, my brother, Logan, my brother-in-law, but my brother, and my son Andrew, took Dad to England for an event featuring vintage car racing from the 40s to the 60s. Dad had been going through chemo, And David Logan and I discussed how to ask him if he would like to go. We knew he'd want to go. We also knew that 1, he didn't feel great with the cancer. 2, it was costly. And 3, he was tired. I was praying about this one night, and all of a sudden, I knew exactly how to find out if Dad would like to go. I would tell him he was going. So I did. We talked about it. We all agreed. We told him he was coming. Tickets were bought and arranged, and he was pleased as a peach. And I can tell you, that trip was amazing. There were times sitting beside him in the stands that he literally looked like a 12-year-old Andy playing with slot cars, imagining Jim Clark extracting every ounce of performance from his Lotus 49 in Silverstone. It was fantastic. In the final days, when the pain was severe, and he was hurting, I would come close to him, and I'd hold his hand, and I'd say, "Dad, Jesus loves you." And he would look at me, and he would smile. His countenance would relax, and he would say, "Yes, yes, he does." And the pain would ease for a little bit. Thank you, Dad. It is with gratitude that I will remember you.